Today we celebrate Pokemon Sword and Shield and make this sword. What is up, fam? Welcome to SkillTree, where we learn how to do just about everything. Now, I am a card-carrying OG Pokemon nerd. I grew up with my face very firmly stuck in my Game Boy, trying my damnedest to be the very best, like no one ever was. I even used to know all the words like the Poke Rap. Charmeleon, Watertoad, Mewtwo, Pikachu, Aerodactyl. What could really be taking up the space in my brain that takes up? I'm sure if I just could replace all the pop culture junk that lived in my head with, like, I don't know, theoretical physics, I could really make something of myself. So yeah, I've been a super Pokemon nerd forever, and for like the past year or so, I've been wanting to try my hand at making an EVA foam sword. These two things sound different, but enter Pokemon Sword and Shield. The newest installment of the Pokemon franchise, Pokemon Sword and Shield, and specifically Pokemon Sword, has taken my two worlds here and put them together. This is because Zacian, the legendary Pokemon on the cover of Sword, is depicted with this badass sword in his mouth. It's like one of those, you got chocolate in my peanut butter, you got peanut butter in my chocolate kind of situations, and is the perfect excuse for me to level up this skill. Constructing the sword. So as I said, the Pokemon on the cover of Pokemon Sword is aptly depicted with a sword in his mouth. And that's the design I'm going to be making here today, but you can use kind of the basis of how this sword is put together to make any design. You can make it way more realistic because this is more of a kind of a cartoony blade, or you can make like a slasher style machete, whatever floats your boat. Basically, the sword's only made of two things, EVA foam and a fiberglass core. And a boatload of glue! I picked up a 10mm and a 2mm sheet of EVA foam from Joann Fabrics. I also grabbed some 3mm dowels for the handle. Lastly, I picked up one of these fiberglass driveway markers from the hardware store. This will make the center of the sword. Now, it was really hard for me to figure out the handle, so I decided to tackle that first. The issue being a good third of the handle right in the center is obstructed in the picture by Zacian's mouth. But extrapolating what I could from the images, I marked where the raised portions would go. Then, I carefully drilled a hole through the center of the piece. Using the coil jig from my chainmail video, link up here, I spun the handle and used a marker to make my marks perfect. Then used some 120 grit sandpaper to grind them into shape. This left me with a bunch of uniform peaks and valleys just like the sword in the game. I then cut off the excess as the one pictured has only 3 grips. Next, I marked out the length of my sword. Using this, I took note of how long my fiberglass needed to be. I cut off the extra with a hacksaw and smoothed it out with a file. You really want to file off the end of that fiberglass because the fiberglass splinters are freaking terrible. You can't see them, but you can feel them for days, stabbing all the way into your soul. They actually get into your soul. That's science. Now I began drawing in the details of my blade. So quick note here, I'm only drawing in the details on one half of the sword. To make it exactly the same on both sides, I roughly cut out the drawing and fold it right down its center. Then I cut along my detailed drawing, making sure the paper stays flatly folded. By doing this, I ensure the finished template is perfectly symmetrical. With my template as a guide, I drew my shape onto the 10mm foam. Then I very carefully cut them out with a razor blade. Finally, I checked to see that both pieces matched cleanly. Cool, so now we have a handle and some foam roughly sword-shaped. You see this? It's sad. That's where that fiberglass is going to come in. We need to sandwich it in between our 2 pieces of foam to give it a rigid body. Aw, you got nervous. I started by positioning the stake along the center of one half of the blade, and pushed down hard to leave an indentation. Then I used a Dremel with a drum sander attachment to cut a shallow groove along that line. I then repeated the process on the other half. So if you put that fiberglass stake in the middle of it without those grooves cut in it, it's going to leave this ugly lump in the very center of your blade. Those grooves allowed some space so it can lay flat. Happy with that, I added a generous amount of contact cement to both halves of the blade. So after you spread this stuff, you need to leave it alone for like 15 to 20 minutes. After that, it will bond on contact immediately. So make sure you're really careful with where you place it, because once they touch each other, that's where it's staying. First, I set the fiberglass core in place. Then I carefully position the other half and press the pieces firmly together. I also poured a little cement in the middle of the handle so it stayed in place. Finally, I stuck a few pieces of foam together to make this pommel, and glued it to the end. With all of my pieces stuck together, it was time to actually start shaping the sword. I used my belt sander along the edge to get the seam as even as possible. Then I used my Dremel on the harder to reach areas, and cleaned up as I went with some 120 grit sandpaper. Next, I drew in all of my details, and cut them in with a little grinder attachment on my Dremel. These little additions really started to pull the whole piece together for me. Like before this, it was a lump of foam, and now it started to look like a sword, a badass sword. It was really cool. Using a heat gun, I heated up sections of my work and smoothed them over. The heat melts the surface of the foam a little bit and makes it really easy to smooth out any of your rough tool marks. Before moving on to the next phase, I cut out these detail pieces from 2mm foam. I'll glue these on after to form the raised areas of the blade. Alright, at this point we have a pretty badass foam sword. It is time for the next big step, which is seal and paint. So EVA foam is porous and flexible, and if you paint directly onto it, there's a good chance that a lot of the paint is going to get absorbed and then it's going to flake and crack as the thing bends. For this purpose, I picked up some Plastidip. It's like a flexible rubber coating that will seal the foam and give the paint a good base to stick to. Just make sure you are in a well-ventilated space. This stuff will knock you out. It's really strong smelling. Funny story, I'm in my basement and you can't see it on camera, but like my furnace is right here, right? And even though it's really well ventilated down here, some of the fumes got like taken into the intake and the whole house just reeks of this stuff. It smells terrible. So be careful with it and do it outside if you can. I would have done it outside, but it's winter here and I don't think it likes the sub-freezing temperatures. I know I don't. Once dry, I added gray primer to ensure the color had a good base to stick to. Next, I taped off the areas around the inset pieces that I carved. I then protected the rest of the areas with some rags, and painted these little inset areas with a glossy blue spray paint. When those dried, I did the reverse, covering the blue areas in order to paint the rest of the sword gold. While that dries, I took the opportunity to paint these little detail pieces a Mambo pink. I want to be the person who names spray paint Mambo pink. I like to think of it's like a bunch of like big businessmen around a desk. What does this color look like to you? Mambo pink. At least that's how it happens in my head. With everything dry, it was time for the finishing touches. I went in and straightened out my blue lines with a paintbrush. Finally, I sprayed those Mambo pink detail pieces with adhesive and carefully applied them to the blade. And check it out! It is a weapon to make any Pokemon Bulbasaur green with envy. So this actually turned out to be a super easy process. And the sword actually feels really good. It's like really evenly weighted, feels nice in the hand. Seriously, it's a really good sword. And I'm pretty sure it would be like convention friendly. It might even be like LARP friendly because it is mostly foam. You'd have to really work to hurt somebody with it. Now you can, of course, paint it to look any way you want. If you want to make it look really realistic, you know, have a nice metal blade and put some, like, dirty-looking grunge on it like it's been through battle. Whatever floats your boat, the process for making it is exactly the same. I'm going to make more of these. That was like a one-day build, and I really like this. If you liked what you saw, why don't you hit me with some of that thumbs up love and hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you know when I release new content. Also, if there's any skills you want to see me cover, leave it in the comments and I will add it to the list. Also, I left some links in the description if you want to build this project. I kind of listed everything and where you could buy it. Alright, I should be going. I'm going to see if I can get my dog to carry this around while I walk through some tall grass. I wonder how I'd go about fitting her in a Pokeball. In the meantime, keep leveling up, you.